Foresight and Thieves, aka How Maggie Got Her Money, an Ashport prequel story, written by G.K. Lund. Dear listener, the story you're about to hear is technically a prequel to the Ashport Mender series, and it follows Maggie while she obtains the money she earned as a mender at a young age. As you know, if you've read or listened to the series, this is a mystery that was never uncovered in those books, an endless annoyance to Nate, especially at the time when he suspected Maggie of criminal activities. I had this story in mind ever since writing Outsider, but since it's so full of spoilers for that book, I put it off until after the series was done. So here it is, a short story that follows Maggie on a very stressful day. Note: unlike the Ashport books, this is not a paranormal romance. This story is set approximately 6 years before the Ashport Mender series begins, a time when Maggie was living in Seattle. She hadn't met Nate at this point, and therefore it's an urban fantasy. Also, she didn't go by Maggie at the time, but Peggy. But I promise, you'll recognize the snark and sharp attitude no matter what name she uses. I hope you'll enjoy younger Maggie's unpredictable day/adventure. Chapter 1. For approximately the 10th time since entering the old warehouse, I wondered if this was the moment a serial killer would spring out from a dark shadow and attack. It was the kind of building that looked innocuous enough from the outside. There was a little paint peeling off, sure, and the signs were faded, but it gave the appearance of being taken care of often enough for someone to give a crap. Still, the darkened hallways and rickety stairs inside, not to mention the dust that tickled my nose, told me there was less attention given to the interior. I could only conclude that the outside was for show, to stave off anyone who'd consider squatting. I approached a flight of stairs, rusty and frail-looking, and sighed. Great. Maybe a crazed murderer or two would trap me there, and then I'd fall to my death because a step gave out rather than being chopped to pieces with an axe. Get it together, Margaret. I shook my head and began the ascent, glad I'd chosen to wear my sneakers. With them, I wouldn't make any noise. Thankfully, the stairs were more solid than they looked. I approached the top landing with no sound. This was not the kind of place I'd choose to go into unprepared, even when I was invited. The building might be situated south in Seattle and fairly central, but that did not give me comfort at the moment. I'd received a text about half an hour ago instructing me to come here and had little choice. Harriet Millibrand, our district's judge, had told me to get here ASAP. And what the judge of your community told you to do, you did. At least if you were one of the menders of that district, the ones who fixed the various and colorful problems that could, and did, arise in any supernatural community. Our kind were not as quiet and good at staying out of trouble as one might think people with otherworldly gifts who needed to stay hidden would be. I noticed a text had come in on my muted phone. It was my boss telling me to get my ass to work at the appointed time, not an hour late. I sighed inwardly. When the judge of your community called you, you came. They were a higher authority than a shift manager. I stuffed the phone in my pocket, ignoring the guy. This shift manager was an idiot anyway. He didn't inspire loyalty from any of the employees at the store. I probably annoyed him the most, because I wasn't afraid of him, despite his roaming gaze. He wasn't even in the top 100 list of what worried me in life, but having a roof over my head was nice. I reached the landing and stopped. Light streamed out from under a door further inside a narrow hallway. My destination, then. Very well. I had no clue what Harriet wanted, but it had to be out of the usual since we weren't meeting in her house or her office. That's where I usually dealt with her, or on the phone. Yep, something strange was definitely going on here. I neared the door without a sound, only to have it open before I could even listen in on the other side. "Oh, hi, Peggy," Harriet blurted in surprise. "You were right, Adeline," she added to someone further inside the room that I couldn't see. She's here. Harriet, a large woman in her 60s, stepped aside to let me in. Then she closed the door and motioned for me to sit next to a sizable table. I did, taking in the room quickly. It was simple like the rest of the building, but cleaner, warmer, lighter, and less creepy. The room was clearly an office with an enormous desk built against the wall opposite the door. The desk surface was filled with papers, books, and computer equipment. A man sat in an office chair, his back to us. From what I could gather, he was middle-aged, had dark hair with a sprinkling of gray in it, and was dressed in a gray suit. The table was a conference table, but smaller than what one would find in the offices of a large company. This had room for 6 people around it. I sat opposite a woman I'd never seen before. She smiled at me, warmth in her blue eyes. That was a good sign, at least. Maybe Harriet wasn't leading a death squad to off me in a seemingly not abandoned warehouse. Not that I thought she would. She was a tough but decent judge. Harriet sat next to me and introduced the woman, though I'd already caught her name, Adeline. Like the man, she appeared middle-aged, and she was dressed for the corporate world too, with a sleek pantsuit and her gray hair in a tight bun. Maybe I was underdressed in my jeans and a black t-shirt? Nah, I didn't care. I gathered my long hair and leaned back in the chair so it wouldn't get caught between me and the back of it. That was annoying. So, I said, who did I piss off this time? I'm sure it was someone, Harriet said, her hard gaze on me. She was a tough lady, but not without humor, something the twitch to her mouth told me now. You have a way of alienating certain people. Just the ones whose crap I'm not taking. I pursed my lips and considered all 3 of them. The man seemed to catch on to the quiet because he closed down the tabs he'd been working in on his laptop and came and joined us. There was something familiar about him. Orson? Riggs? I asked him. Yes. Have we met? His brows creased as he sat next to Adeline. I had to think, but yes. Your cousin Reggie. He kept using his ability to cash fake checks last year. The poor bank tellers never knew what hit them. I think you came by his mom's house once when I was there. Ah, yes, Reggie. Orson leaned back and folded his hands over his stomach. I had to help rectify the mistake in the bank before the tellers were blamed for being in on it. I nodded. I hadn't been part of that. I'd only dealt with getting Reggie to stop his actions. My guess, then, was that Orson had some form of technokinetic ability. How else could he have manipulated the bank system? That is an old and settled job, Harriet chimed in, and those are the reason we're here. They are? I asked. Shoot. So who's pissed? No one's pissed off, dear, at least about this. Knowing you, there might be many grudges throughout the city. Harriet shrugged. Anyway, I wanted to introduce you to Adeline for a special reason. She's a psychic. Oh no, I blurted. Am I dying? Is it going to be some morbid accident or something where people take photos and post them online? Adeline uttered, confusion written on her face. Yes, you are. I have no idea when or how though, so I think you're safe there. Small victories, I suppose, I said, and drummed my fingers on the armrest of my chair. What kind of psychic? I added, a bit more curious than I was letting on. I'd never met her before, and if this was about a job they wanted me to take, then I should know where the information came from. Precognizant. I nodded. She could see the future. It was one of the most unreliable abilities, yet also highly sought after. The precognizants who were strong often kept it on the down low to avoid being pestered by people who wanted to know when they would die or get married or where their runaway pet had gone. It could, understandably so, get tiring. I knew how it was. I kept my own ability secret, but not for the same reasons. Right, I said, and stopped my drumming fingers and sat up a bit. What's the bad thing that needs stopping then? Oh no, Harriet shook her head. No, Peggy, you misunderstand. This is not about a job. This is about rewarding you. Huh? I blurted. Super elegant, I know. Rewarding you, Harriet repeated patiently. You've been a mender for us for a couple of years now, and our affiliates trust you. You also haven't given up but keep pushing through. It's time you were solidified. I stared at all three people around the table. Were they for real? I dreamed of this. Not for the reward, though that would make things easier, but to know I was set, that people trusted me to take care of things. The realization made me, wow, Harriet said. I think I've never seen you speechless before. Kind of nice for my ears, she added and chuckled. So how does this work? I managed to ask, glancing over at Adeline. Was that why she was here? I'd talked to another mender in a different district who'd been given the winning lottery numbers for her payment. Was this the same kind of thing? Orson will see to it that your funds are managed. And by managed, do you mean legally? I pointedly eyed the guy's computer equipment, which was kept in a shady warehouse. Another thing about a mender's funds was that they were supposed to be legal and above board should anyone ever want to check into it. Of course, I'm a certified accountant with years of experience on the stock market, Orson said. That didn't actually answer my question, I pointed out. The guy laughed and winked at Harriet. They'd probably had a chat about me before I arrived then. Don't worry about that, Peggy, Harriet said. Everything will be completely spick and span, nothing to draw any attention. Okay, I nodded. I didn't know Adeline or Orson, but I knew and trusted Harriet. So what do I have to do? Everything that Adeline tells you, to a T. Chapter 2. The winning numbers for a lottery ticket. That would have been so great. Walk somewhere where they sold lottery tickets, buy one, wait, win, and collect. A dream. I huffed as I sat crouched between and under shrubbery and bushes near a small pond in the Discovery Park area. The body of water was murky, and its banks were overgrown with bushes that met the reeds in the water. I tightened my ponytail and slid the hood of my hoodie over my head. Then I carefully crawled forward, aware of how easily I could get spotted despite the gray and black clothes I wore. Mud squished under my hands and between my fingers while I moved. Lovely. Lottery tickets were clean and safe. I glanced over at the onslaught of cops on the other side of the pond, and somewhat to my left. They wouldn't see me with ease. I hoped. There had been quite the party here last night, for some reason. Judging by the 6 officers cleaning up their police tape and whatnot, it must have been a heck of a party, likely with young participants partaking in some kind of illegal substance. Why else would the police bother dealing with it? I glanced down at my mud-caked hands and wondered why I was bothering. I kept my knees up to avoid dirtying my clothes despite keeping low, and my back was starting to hurt too. Still, Adeline had said to come here right after dawn, avoid the cops, and reach the bank to the right of a halfway fallen tree whose branches were now growing out over the water's surface. Easy peasy. I spied the cops again. None were taking any interest in keeping an eye on their surroundings. But they would. Adeline had said so, and considering I didn't trust any of them as a matter of principle, I wasn't happy about the situation. None of my kind would be. Cops were too curious about our otherworldly ways when they caught on. Now, though, I only risked them thinking I belonged to the people throwing a party last night. I didn't have time for that. Adeline had said they would search around the pond before calling it and leaving. If they did that without me finding my reward, they would find it. That was unacceptable. Such opportunities were not abundant. When you got your reward, you had to take it. It wasn't lost on me that I was young for a solidified mender either. At 19, I was getting my reward earlier than many. Then again, I'd fallen into this line of work early. But I was not going to mess this up by letting cops of all people steal away something that would make my life easier. Carefully, I moved to the bank. The raw smell of grass and water surrounded me. The air was frigid this early, and birds chirped nearby. The only thing that did not belong out here were the muffled voices of the cops. But as long as they were muffled and not raised to shouts, I was not the target of their interest. Besides, I had my own interest right in front of me now. There, right under the water's surface, lay a circular disc with its bright purple, yellow, and white checkered pattern. I reached out and snatched it. Someone had dropped it during the night, according to Adeline, and it hadn't sunk under the mud yet. I had to say, her predictions were spot on. Water dripped from my hand, and I clutched the chip and backed away calmly and in a hurry until I was certain of not being seen. Then, I sat back on my haunches and opened my hand, staring at the chip in disbelief. So many zeros, I muttered, never having seen a six-figure gambling chip before. It really would make all the difference. About 2 hours later, I was back in the city, swearing that when Orson had done his number magic, the first thing I would get was a car that worked. Mine was in the shop for the umpteenth time for making weird scraping noises. Since my only friend with a car had needed it herself today, my feet had been my ride out to the park and back again. I had no choice, though. "Get there yourself. Do not rely on others," Adeline had said. I was so not going to blow this by not listening. Everything she'd told me had turned out true so far, and so I stayed away from public transport too. The next thing on my predetermined schedule was to bring the chip back to Orson. My guess, from what little I knew about such things, was that I couldn't simply walk into a casino and cash it. It was worth too much money not to be suspicious. As far as I knew, gambling chips were microchipped, and high-value script like this might have been deactivated when taken out of the casino where some lucky person had won it and then proceeded not to cash it. What with Orson being more than a regular accountant, though, I was guessing he could make sure the RFID tracker inside would be activated indeed when it was time to cash in on the winnings. Then he could get to his accounting and stocks and whatever. And I could get a good car. No, a great car. Win-win. I could only assume Adeline forcing me to walk everywhere had to do with timing. Still, timing foreseen events by walking through the city meant she couldn't measure it by the second. By the time I scurried up Cedar Street toward 2nd Avenue, my stomach was rumbling in protest against the long morning and muddy exercise. I clenched my hand around the circular disc in my little shoulder-strap purse, still hardly believing it was there. No, the strenuous activities of this night and early morning were totally worth it. The smell of fresh baked pastry and cinnamon drew me inside a cozy bakery next to a dry cleaner where the doors stood open so they could lure people inside with the best advertising they had, the irresistible scent of their baked goods. I figured I wouldn't stay but grab some coffee and something to eat on my way back south toward the industrial district in Orson. After that, my day could be spent out in the sun without worry. For once, I had no pressing jobs pestering me. The thought had me smiling wider a minute later, when standing in line, my phone beeped with an incoming text. It was my boss informing me I didn't need to come back to work, considering the fact that I was not working there anymore. I scoffed at the message, regretting not quitting myself, and sent him the middle finger emoji back for good measure. It wasn't that the guy said many nasty things, but he had never looked me in the eye, being too busy staring at my chest instead. Good riddance. For the first time since I'd been on my own, I did not have to worry about where my next paycheck would come from. It would make my highly irregular work schedule somewhat easier. I was standing with a still warm cinnamon bun in my hand, waiting for my coffee to be made, when two hooded men entered the premises and started screaming for everyone to back up. They drew ski masks down over their faces and then pushed back their hoods while pointing guns at the patrons of the bakery. They didn't even have to fire the weapons to make their point. People screamed and let themselves be pushed back, away from the doors the intended robbers were now closing. Then they went from being would-be robbers to actual ones. They were screaming for people's valuables and phones. One man attempted to call for help and was promptly hit over the head with the gun. He slumped to the floor, toppling over a chair on his way down. I carefully put my cinnamon bun on a nearby table, not interested in drawing their attention. They clearly didn't want to shoot, but that didn't mean they wouldn't. My phone was in the back pocket of my jeans where I'd hastily stuffed it before placing my order. My purse, though, was way too visible. "In the bag!" One of the men snapped at me when I made no move to do like everyone else. "In the bag!" he yelled louder and aimed his weapon straight at my face, barely giving a slight nod at the purse that I carried, the strap diagonally from shoulder to hip. My chip was in there. This was not happening. "Speed up, you idiot," the robber added. "Please do what he says," an older woman whispered next to me. She was shaking, barely keeping it together. I sighed and lifted the purse off myself before putting it in the guy's black carry-all bag. With a last glare, he moved on to a man behind me. A minute later, about 30 people had been robbed of their belongings, and we were all forced back against the windows, giving the robbers space for what turned out to be their actual heist. They were so not interested in the cafe. It was the dry cleaners next door. One of the robbers stayed in the cafe, guarding the doors and us while keeping an eye out for the police, I assumed. The other one headed past the counter and to the narrow hallway that led to the bathrooms, storage, and as it turned out, the dry cleaner. There weren't that many screams from in there. There likely were no customers. Funny that. I focused my attention to the robber left in the cafe. He might be wearing a ski mask, but his eyes were visible, blue and narrowed. I focused in on him, using my ability to latch on to people's inner thoughts. I needed to see people's eyes to do it, and was only interrupted when he turned to peer out the window. His thoughts came clear to me. "They need to hurry. We can't stay here any longer. What's taking so long? Hurry, Finley." So, the brown-eyed guy currently robbing the dry cleaners was named Finley. There were a lot of hasty and confused thoughts like this. I didn't find it strange. He was under high pressure, adrenaline soaring through his body. "Get on with it. Get on with it." The guy's thoughts rambled on. He was unaware of my intense stare, locking onto his private thoughts, hearing everything. There was a reason I didn't go around announcing this evasive ability to people. He glanced down at his watch. 3 minutes. Someone will have seen by now. 3 minutes. Out the back, meet the car in the first alley 2 streets over. Dump everything. Change. Head to the office. Meet up. Get on with it, Finley. 2 minutes. "Hey," a man near me whispered. The other one left the hallway clear. "We can get out through the window in the men's room." "Are you insane?" another man whispered. "That's a great idea," I chimed in. "Look how nervous that guy is with the gun." "Yeah, he'll shoot someone," another whispered. It continued like that for half a minute. I was fairly sure the guy in the cafe was nervous for other reasons than holding a gun on someone. His hand was pretty steady. But I did not want to stay here for 2 reasons. 1, it would take ages to give my statement to the police, which would give the robbers plenty of time to get away. 2, they had my chip. That was my money. Hell, I wouldn't get another chance at this. And if I did, it would likely be because I was young, and they felt sorry for me. Hell no, I was not having that. Being pitied was not how you solidified yourself as a mender. "He won't even see us," a woman argued. "We're too far in the back." I glanced around and noticed the only camera in the place was aimed at the cash register. This was my best chance. "Come on," a big guy in the back whispered, and that seemed to be it. I followed along with 8 other people and snuck through to the hallway and past the door into the dry cleaners. Then to the men's room and out the window using a thankfully clean-looking urinal to climb over and reach the window. The big guy caught me on the outside, and I accepted his help to avoid drawing attention to myself. In the end, 9 people escaped the cafe that way, milling around out back. "Someone have a phone?" the big guy asked. A woman, a few years older than me, retrieved hers from her bra. Thankfully, the robbers were not the ogling kind, like my former boss. Also, this meant I didn't have to use my phone. While they all gathered around her as she called the police, I slipped away quietly and unnoticed, to find a suitable spot to wait for the robbers. I'd heard where they were going. Chapter 3. Sometimes being young and not taken seriously paid off. The other patrons, if they even remembered me, would think I ran away in fear. If the cops tracked me down for a statement, I'd use that exact excuse, poor teenaged me and so on. When were people going to learn that it wasn't the number of years you had on your back that decided your understanding of the world, but what had happened to you in some of those years? There was a reason people twice, even thrice my age came to me for help when they, in all their advanced wisdom, messed up. Of course, I berated myself. I had screwed up today on my own. I should never have gone to get something to eat. It hadn't occurred to me that a tiny stop like that could mess up Adeline's prediction so badly. Still, I mused while watching the robbers arrive in a back alley about 3 minutes' run from the cafe. I hadn't lost my chip yet. Merely misplaced it a little bit. All I had to do was get it back, and then get it to Orson. That was all. I eyed the large carry-all bags the two robbers shucked off their backs and let fall to the ground. One of them was full of the valuables they'd stolen from the patrons in the cafe, plus the register. The other one appeared to be full too. I guessed that the dry cleaner was more than that, likely a front for money laundering. Judging by the difference in how the bags bulged, I guessed the dry cleaners had been their intended target too. The cafe was a ruse and an easier way inside the dry cleaner, which likely had some added security toward the front door, but not to the nice and cozy cafe they shared a wall with. Sirens blared close by. The other patrons had been able to get help then. The robbers seemed unconcerned. They'd planned this, and judging by the third guy driving up in a pizza delivery van, they had their getaway ready too. I had been waiting for them behind a dumpster which had, to my relief, turned out to be empty and therefore relatively odor-free. They had taken in the area, of course. There were no back doors or windows here if one discounted the locked door to the restaurant that hadn't opened for the day yet. They were the ones to use the dumpster. No, the robbers had done their research. No one was going to bother them here. I slipped out from behind the dumpster and around to the nearest corner after the car arrived. It parked so that I was behind them all. A third guy, young with dark curls and a pizza delivery uniform, jumped out and ran to open the back of the car. There, he proceeded to pull two electric kick scooters out. Seriously? I stared at this spectacle. The robbers lifted the bags to the back of the car, too. Then they took a small green bag the pizza guy handed them and promptly began changing clothes while Pizza Guy took their guns and hid them among numerous pizza boxes in the back of the van. Judging by the tempting smell wafting its way over to me and the dumpster, those boxes were not empty. Should he be stopped? Then he'd appear pretty legit. Only proper scrutiny would reveal anything. After that, he added what looked like a phone of some kind to me at that distance, into the bag with the cafe guests' stolen things. My guess was a jammer, so they couldn't be tracked via the stolen phones. They didn't have time to turn them all off now. At least, that was what I would have done. Then, Pizza Guy went around the car to keep watch. The robbers stripped off their dark garb and changed into jeans, sneakers, and colorful t-shirts and shirts. They transformed into normal-looking young men, kind of like students or tourists. I shook my head. It wasn't a bad plan, actually. If I was reading them right, of course. Their further plans didn't interest me as much as the bags of valuables. I spied the less bulging one on the ground. That was where my purse, and thereby, my gaming chip was. I had paid attention inside the cafe and knew it to be almost in the middle. There had been a few more people putting their things in after me. But my purse would be bigger and easier to snatch than smaller wallets if I was given the chance. I knew this would be risky, but I didn't want to lose sight of these people, and once the money was in the car, I would. When the two robbers grabbed each their kick scooter and walked up to the driver, I made my move. I didn't have the luxury of planning ahead like these guys. With soundless footfalls, I ran over to the two bags that were ready to be loaded into the car. I heard the agitated, yet muffled voices of the robbers. I quickly hit the ground and peered under the car. They were all next to the driver's side door, the pizza guy's feet already pointing in my direction. They were merely discussing something in their haste. More sirens wailed in their hurry nearby. I had no time. I dove for the smallest bag and yanked the zipper open. It was filled with the belongings of the patrons of the cafe. There were mostly wallets and phones, but also a few purses and jewelry. I couldn't remember hearing the robbers demanding people's jewelry, but the scared guests in there must have thrown everything in to be sure not to be shot. Jewelry, of course, took time to remove, and since the dry cleaners had been the target anyway, I saw how spending time on anything but wallets and phones to avoid anyone calling the cops would be a time suck for them. I rummaged through the bag, and there, among all the valuables, I found my little purse. It was black and fairly nondescript, but easily identifiable for me due to the unusual weight to it. I took it out and got up, ready to run, but then froze, hurried footsteps too close. Pizza guy was coming. There was no time for me to pop back behind the dumpster. Running out of the alley was too far not to be seen. I didn't have a choice, though. Still, I needed to stop the man who was closest to me from following me. I could easily outrun the other two since they were on the other side of the car. I shifted my grip on my purse and began spinning it by the strap. The lead lining sewn into the bottom made for a stealthy-looking weapon ready to be used at any time. Like now. I saw the guy's feet under the back door of the car. I barely saw his face in profile before I swung the purse and hit my target. Said face. The guy gave a startled and swiftly silenced cry of surprise more than pain, and promptly fell back on his ass. That was all I needed, except he was quicker to respond than I anticipated. Somehow, with one hand covering the lower half of his hurt face, he slung his free hand out and grabbed my ankle before I'd gotten more than one step forward. I didn't fall but had to step back and kick with my free foot to get the guy to release me. He did, but by then it was too late. The only comforting thought I had, while I heard the other two come racing around the car, was that their guns were tucked away among the pizza boxes. That evened my odds somewhat, but I was not fool enough to think I could take on 3 guys at the same time. That wasn't my plan either, as far as I had time to think any of this through. The 2 robbers did the smart thing and came at me on each their side of the car. I swung my purse again, repeating the trick I'd used against Pizza Guy. The makeshift weapons smacked into the face of the guy who'd robbed the dry cleaners, Finley. Before even paying attention to where he landed, likely on top of Pizza Guy who was scrambling under him to get up, I swung low and kicked the other robber in the knee just when he came around the corner of the car. He cried out in pain and shock, stumbling forward. That was my cue to get the hell out of there. This time, when I was seized from behind, it wasn't my foot they grabbed onto. I felt a vicious yank to the back of my head, my ponytail, and cried out as I was pulled that way. I twisted in the air on instinct and landed on my side rather than my back. I cried out at the impact, the ground unforgivably hard. I noticed Pizza Guy and Finley fighting to get up still. That meant it was the guy I'd kicked who managed to pull me back. I groaned in pain before being able to roll over and see him. He'd kicked me hard in the upper thigh. The next kick was aimed at my ribs, but I managed to block it with my arm, shielding that area. He didn't seem to notice the protective move. Instead, he dove for the car and rummaged inside the back. The other 2 got to their feet, and though I tried, I wasn't fast enough. Before I could get any momentum, the robber came back with a gun in his hand. "It's a girl," Pizza Guy said, rubbing his jaw. "You seem surprised we exist," I muttered, but they didn't pay attention. "I remember her," the guy with the gun said. "She didn't want to hand over her purse." "What, in the cafe?" "Yeah." This wasn't good. I curled up somewhat, clutching my leg, trying to hide the purse, but the guy with the gun saw it anyway. "It's there! Get it!" The other robber, Finley, stepped closer to do that. I glared up at him, refusing to let go of the purse, locking onto his mind in the process. We don't have time for this, he thought. The cops are already here fanning out. We need to get to the office now. He grabbed the strap and yanked to no avail. Let go of it, the guy with the gun demanded, bending and waving the weapon in front of my face. I already knew they wanted to avoid bloodshed, but then there was knowing their intentions and being certain about them. I let go and Finley handed the purse up to the other guy. Let's see what's making her such a nuisance, he said, and ripped the zipper open. Nuisance? She broke my nose, Pizza Guy exclaimed. No, she didn't, Finley objected, his face red from the smack he'd gotten. You're not even bleeding. Calm down. You're fine. We need to go now, he thought on. Damn it, Rudy. Lower the gun. I curled up some more on the ground, cradling my leg. Finley got up and my connection to him was broken. Well, Gun Guy or Rudy said. Look at this. No wonder she didn't want to hand it over. He held the gaming chip out with a triumphant smirk on his face. That is a lot of money, Finley said at the same time Pizza Guy whistled at the sight. No matter, Finley said. We need to go. We're 3 minutes behind. Fine. Rudy stuffed the chip back in my purse and tossed it into the still open bag. Then he turned the gun on me. What the hell are you doing? Finley protested. She's seen our faces, Pizza Guy said, and shrugged off my apparent impending demise. So, she likely stole that chip. Why else wouldn't she wait for the cops? Leave her and let's go. Seriously? Rudy stared at his companions in confusion. She followed us here. Look at her. She won't be following anyone now. Guys, the cops. We need to go, Pizza Guy said, suddenly more interested in their actual plan than me. The increasing number of sirens out there meant more cops were arriving. Okay, fine. Rudy handed the gun over to Finley, who was closest to the car, and he put the weapon back inside. He then heaved the 2 bags from the robbery inside and shut the back door. I was all but forgotten on the ground. They ran around the car and did what they'd planned. The 2 robbers grabbed each their electric scooter and left the alley. The car followed shortly, but the driver took a right out on the street instead of left like Finley and Rudy. I let go of my non-hurt leg and sat up then, glaring after them. I did a quick check of myself. My hip hurt but wasn't injured from the kick. My arm was worse, but nothing I couldn't suppress. That was my money they'd run off with. That was so unacceptable. I zipped up my hoodie to keep it tight to my body and avoid it flopping around me. They might have thought me hurt, and that had been the point. Now, I needed focus and strength, because I was not giving up. I got to my feet and was running at full speed before I even left the alley. Chapter 4. It's ridiculous how something so innocent-looking as an electric kick scooter makes people not suspect you of armed robbery. Finley and Rudy actually breezed past the crime scene 1 block over, seeming like tourists or students having fun. I knew that because I was not having fun while running after them. Since it was broad daylight, I couldn't very well sprint everywhere without being noticed, certainly not so close to the crime scene. I noted the increased police presence in the nearby area. They were operating under the assumption that there were armed robbers on the loose in the city. That was true, of course. They were on the loose, only not armed anymore. I huffed and focused on controlling my breathing, keeping a steady pace, and glancing at the non-existing watch on my wrist, giving people the idea I was late for something. For the most part, I drew little attention. Finley and Rudy moved through the city at a steady pace too. They didn't go too fast and stayed mainly on the sidewalks, thankfully even waiting for green lights. If none of that had been the case, I wouldn't have been able to keep up with them. Or straggling behind them, to be more precise. But by taking shortcuts and anticipating a little bit, I managed to keep them in my sight. I ran and jogged, so focused on them there was little else to think about. Well, except for the fact that they'd stolen my chip. That spurred me on more than anything. I was not coming back to Orson empty-handed. Or worse, admitting to Harriet that I'd failed such simple instructions and lost what they'd entrusted me with. About 20 minutes later, when they were headed south, they began speeding up a little. There were fewer people and cops around. I pressed on, hoping to see where they were going to stop. I knew they were. Finley had thought about going to an office. That did not mean leave town right now. No, they were planning to hide out somewhere until the fire died down. Even as far away as I was from the cafe now, I still saw more police cars than usual. The sirens weren't blaring anymore, but the cops were clearly searching for someone. This didn't suit me at all. I needed to find these guys first and get my chip back. After that? Well, the robbers were not affiliated with my community, so that was their problem. I took care of mine, and they scared the bejesus out of people trying to get some coffee. I came to a halt when finally, the bike soared around a corner further ahead. I knew I wouldn't be able to see where they went that far ahead of me. Still, I pressed on, walking with a brisk pace that allowed me to take some deep breaths at least. I was right. Rounding the same corner, I didn't see them anymore. And yet I walked on. Their disappearance annoyed me. How much further could they have gone? I was walking aimlessly in a more open area with a few small businesses, warehouses, and office buildings when my answer was given to me in the form of a pizza delivery van. The only reason I noticed him before he saw me was that he came driving into the street in front of me. I drew closer to the buildings beside me and walked in the same direction while pulling my hood up. An old lady walking her dog stared at me funny. It was too hot to cover your head like that on a sunny day, but I didn't care, as long as that was all she did. Giving me a weird look and alerting the police were not the same thing. Pizza Guy didn't drive far, but took a left and entered the premises of a gray and boring-looking office building half a block ahead of me. I walked closer and noticed the for lease sign outside. So, they were squatting for a short time in there, huh? I did not believe they'd be stupid enough to rent the place and leave any kind of trace. They had been smart enough to plan this properly so far. But what to do? If they were simply switching cars, then I was at a loss. I couldn't follow them any longer on my feet. But if they were to wait out the storm they'd created, then maybe I could surprise them? I sidled up to a section of a wall outside a small coffee shop and a store that sold sporting goods, where nothing was in my way, and stared daggers at the office building. I needed to get inside, and I needed to know what they were doing. My gaze roamed the wide street out front and my limited possibilities. The last thing I needed was for them to glance outside and see me. My eyes snagged on a drop-in sign of a hair salon further ahead. I raised my hand and slid my ponytail through my fingers. My scalp still burned from Rudy grabbing my hair and yanking me back. I still burned from it on the inside, too. 10 minutes later, I sat in a chair in the salon with a chatty hairdresser cutting away at my hair. You know, this is always so exciting. People with such long hair as you have trouble taking off so much at once. They usually do it in a few-inch increments. Oh, look at that, she added, and changed the topic when she saw what I was checking on my phone. Can you believe it? An armed robbery like that? In broad daylight? I hope they catch them soon. Yeah, I said, and lowered my phone, my attention back on the office building across the street. Those poor people, the hairdresser chattered on. She was right about that. The robbers who'd scared all those people seemed to be taking things slowly now. So far, I'd seen no movement near any window. It made me think they weren't keeping a watch out, especially toward the street. Big mistake. They had to be feeling quite confident they'd gotten away. Another thing was the fact that I didn't see the kick scooters or the car. But unless I was reading the area wrong, there was no other way to leave the premises with a big fence back there. I had to assume they were all hidden in the garage next to the office building. The building itself offered some possibilities. It had 3 floors with windows on all sides. I tapped my fingers on the armrest, thinking this through. No need to be nervous, the hairdresser chirped, brushing out my hair. Have a look, she added, and took a step back. I hadn't been paying attention beyond answering her now and then during the last half an hour, so when I saw what she'd done, I was genuinely surprised. My hair was so much shorter, yet still longer than short. It hung right above my shoulders, the waves coming more to their right now that they weren't so drawn down by gravity. The long bob framed my face, and I had to run a hand over the back, feeling the layered cut that left the lower part of my neck slightly exposed. It felt so light and different. What do you think? I like it, I said, and nodded without thinking. Yes, I did. I had no wish to cut my hair short. I preferred some length to it, but this would at least make it a bit harder to stop me by pulling my hair the way Rudy had. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. Thank you. 5 minutes later, thanks to this being a modern salon where I could pay with my phone, I walked out with a plan. That plan did not involve the two cops who now stood outside the coffee shop, chatting while they waited for their coffee, no doubt. I yanked my hood up and crossed the street when they weren't looking. I recognized them. A man and a woman, a couple of detectives I'd bumped into on occasion. They didn't like me much, and the feeling was mutual. I kept walking in the same direction, though, but they never bothered with me. Soon, I took a right, and then sped up until I came up behind the office building. Jumping the fence was easy, and I kept the hood on. I didn't spot any cameras, but you never knew. What I did spot was an overturned piece of corrugated sheet metal. I lifted a corner of it, careful not to make any noise, and spotted a small crack in the fence to the property next door. The crack had been widened at the bottom, allowing for people without too broad shoulders to pass through. I glanced over my shoulder at the graffiti on the wall of the office building and smiled. Whoever the vandals were, I was always appreciative of unexpected help. I lowered the sheet metal and put my attention back to the building. Scaling the wall proved easy enough with the windows on every floor. I was also lucky in the sense that the neighboring building seemed to be a storage building of some kind, a bit worn with flaking paint, and most importantly, no windows. Cameras weren't the only thing that could spot you. I was free to climb without interruption and with a low risk of being seen. The biggest risk factor was the windows, which sills and edges I used to find hand and footholds. I carefully peered inside everyone before climbing into view, making sure the robbers weren't inside any of them. Thankfully, they were empty. Seemed the entire building could be rented. The realtors apparently only cared about the front of it appearing clean and nice, not bothering to remove the graffiti below. I finally ran into some luck on the third window I checked on the second floor. My arms were strained where I hung onto the frame, one foot placed on the windowsill, peering inside yet another sparsely furnished office, void of people. Except this one had an open door. There was a light on out in the corridor, and most importantly, I could see the end of one of the black carry-all bags with the loot. So, they'd hold up here then. Problem was, I didn't have anything to jimmy open a window with, because all my stuff was in my purse and already inside the building. I bit my lower lip and considered my options. The windows were easy enough. All I needed was a knife with a thin blade. That would take care of the flimsy locks. Breaking a window, even on the lower levels, was too much of a risk. The robbers were inside an empty and likely quiet building. The chance of them hearing me was too big. I huffed and glanced down. I had no choice. I had to climb back down and find a tool to help me. The upside was I could probably enter on ground level, especially on this side. They weren't paying attention here, and were likely up on the second floor anyway. At least my recognizance had helped with that knowledge. Shortly thereafter, I landed on the ground and headed back to the fence, jumping it. There was a need to remove some weeds behind the building, but the area was otherwise tidy and empty of handily fallen knives on the ground. I decided to walk back to the other side of the building, spying the ground around me for anything that might help. At this point, I'd even be happy with a piece of discarded metal if it had the right shape. I didn't know how much time I had, and I didn't want to leave the area and risk losing sight of the robbers. It was now or never. "Well, look who we have here!" A gleeful female voice sounded behind me. I stopped and forced away a moo of disgust before I turned and faced the two detectives I'd spied earlier. I'd just crossed the street, not too far from the hair salon, thinking I could persuade the nice hairdresser to sell me a pair of shears or something similar that I could use. "I'd say it's the little girl we saw on footage earlier," the male cop said. I narrowed my eyes at them. Couldn't help it. "Why do you say that, Detective Lampert?" I asked him, refusing to let these two intimidate me. "Is it because I'm not big like you?" I pointedly eyed the middle-aged man's potbelly. "Not an old fart like you? Or do you just like pointing out teenage girls to anyone nearby because of some weird interest?" The man's eyes bulged a moment, his cheeks flushing red in anger and shock as he sputtered. "Still have a smart mouth, I see, Peggy," Detective Samaras said. She was about her partner's age, but a lot healthier looking. I still deem them to have the same level of intellect, though. "It's a good thing you're not a little girl, but an actual adult who's responsible for her actions." "Oh? And what actions would that be today, then?" I asked her, not liking how close they got up in my face. I'd dealt with them before when I'd showed up in some odd places. I refused to back down. "There was a robbery a couple of hours ago." "I read about it. Horrible." "And we've seen the surveillance footage," Samaras went on, unperturbed. "Guess who was on it?" "I don't know. Who?" "One Peggy Alder, of course. Who else?" "Me?" "Oh, golly," I feigned shock. "Was that the cafe that got robbed? I must have been in there only minutes before it happened." The detectives snorted in unison at me, not fooled by my faux surprise, not that I'd intended for them to be. I knew I would have been caught on camera minutes before the robbers came in, because that was when I'd paid. After that was a matter of witnesses remembering me. "Why are you here?" Lampert asked, eyeing me from top to toe. In his defense, he wasn't a creeper. That I knew of, at least. He was likely doing a visual check for weapons. I didn't have any, save my stolen purse. It never paid to have anything someone like these two could react to and start causing trouble over. "Am I not allowed to be here?" I glanced around theatrically. I was standing on a public street, after all. The detectives shared a look and then focused on me again. "You show up in the strangest places, Peggy," Lampert said. Samaras nodded. "A short while ago you were where a robbery occurred. An armed robbery. Now you're here." She glanced around. Lampert proceeded to ask me some questions about my whereabouts the last couple of hours, and I answered him, but decided to listen in on his partner. Something about the way she kept taking in the area bothered me. Maintaining a conversation with someone other than the one I was listening in on was difficult, but I managed. Samaras's thoughts flowed to me, slightly broken by my half-focus on Lampert. There is something off about her, she thought. Wasn't that what they all thought? It was why my kind stayed away from the police. They became so easily suspicious, their subconscious catching on to our nature-defying ways. When mixing in their training and investigating, well, it was not a good fit. Why is she here? Last I saw her was outside the Murphy residence. They might say what they want, but something happened there that night. The neighbors didn't all hear the same hallucination. It can't be a coincidence she's here. "No, Detective Lampert," I said with patience I did not feel. "I am not carrying large sums of money on me. Are you looking for an excuse to feel me up?" Samaras ignored us, her eyes scanning the street, her thoughts still flowing to me. If she was there when it happened, and now she's here, there has to be a link. We could use a win after the debacle with the De Groot case. If she could look at where they're holed up instead of at me. She's such a smug brat. It's not normal, not showing fear. I broke my connection to her then. I didn't need to hear anymore because her problems had given me an idea. They needed a win, and though I was loath to give them one, I needed a win too. And to get that win, I could use a distraction. "Are you listening?" Lampert snapped at me. "Oh yes, sir," with riveting attention. My tone of voice was not lost on him. He sneered at me and then huffed a sigh. "Let's go. I don't have any patience for her," Samaras said. I eyed her again, reconnecting briefly, her decisive thought audible to only me. "Then we can follow her." I couldn't help a smirk. These two ding-dongs would certainly not be following me. My pride would take a serious nosedive the day that happened without my knowledge. "I have been listening, Detective Lampert," I said, ignoring Samaris's comment about leaving. "I've even answered all of your questions." "Don't be snide. It's only that you've been asking the wrong ones." "I what?" The man was more than 30 years my senior, and I still managed to make him shuffle his feet. "You've been asking what my connection to the robbers is." "Spit it out," Samaras snapped. "Whatever bullcrap this is." "Not bull. I wasn't lying when I said I didn't have any money on me. I don't. Because the bastards who robbed the cafe stole them from me. I want them back." I decided to leave out the information about this being about more than my wallet. "So?" Lampert prodded, rolling his hand to get me to speed up. "So I followed them here," I said earnestly, and decided to flash them a big smile to really make my point. "Wouldn't you guys look like heroes if you were the ones to discover them?" Chapter 5. "What the hell are you doing?" Lampert snarled and spun around, a hand on his holstered gun. He'd noticed me about 10 seconds after I snuck up on him where he was standing bent over the trunk of his and Samaris's car. "Nothing," I said, sure I was completely failing the innocence test and not caring. The look on the guy's face was rewarding enough in its entertainment value. The small knife I'd snatched from the trunk lay safely in my palm. An even greater reward. I almost tisked at the man. He should pay more attention, especially when he trusted someone as little as me. "Take a few steps back," he said, and made a shooing motion. I shrugged and did what I was told, slipping the knife into my jean pocket. Detective Samaras was standing a few yards away, talking on the phone. After I'd told them the whereabouts of the robbers, they'd gotten their car, forced me to come along, and parked on the neighboring plot with the storage building. The car could not be seen from the office building due to the storage building shielding it. The detectives had then called for backup, and I was waiting patiently for that too. I knew I didn't have a lot of time, but that gaming chip was not going to end up in some evidence locker. If I was quick, I might have a chance at this. The detectives were already wearing their bulletproof vests and acting agitated. They cast wary glances my way now and then. How could they know whether I was lying? But if I was telling the truth, then that would be great for them. And me. If I could pull this off. Their backup did not use their sirens. Suddenly, the streets merely seemed to fill with police cars. For once, I was happy to see them, because they drew the attention of the ornery detectives away from me. The moment Samaras and Lampert began walking toward their colleagues, who were getting out of their cars, I aimed for the trunk again. I snatched a gas mask and promptly turned and ran along the storage building back toward the little hole in the fence, which I on this side located behind a small heap of old tires. There, I crouched down and breathed for a second. There were no raised voices behind me. That was good. The cops weren't bothering with me. I could only hope the robbers hadn't seen me over the fence by chance. I crawled through the opening. Safely through, I carefully shimmied out from under the corrugated sheet metal, managing without creating any noise. One part of my ever-changing plan had already gone bust. Sneaking inside on ground level, when the cops were about to enter down there too, was a no-go. I used the straps on the gas mask to tie it to my jeans, and then scurried up the wall, using the windows once again for hand and footholds. Why people stopped climbing after childhood was beyond me. It was such a useful thing to be good at. Lampert's knife did the trick, and I soon found myself entering the room where I'd spotted the open door. I could hear voices from further inside the building somewhere, likely down the corridor. The floor was carpeted. Good. It made it easier to move without a sound. I neared the door and listened for any movement nearby. There was none, but I could still hear them talking. It was muffled so I couldn't discern anything in particular, but they sounded relaxed. I shook my head. What idiots! They'd been able to plan and execute the robbery and their getaway, even with my interference. Now they seemed to think they were safe. Hubris was not a robber's best friend. I risked peeking into the corridor. The carry-all bags stood right outside, and I saw why. A set of stairs led downstairs. They'd likely put them there to have them ready when it was time to leave. The time to leave, of course, was 20 minutes ago when two detectives had stopped a familiar-looking woman on the street right outside their hideout. But if they couldn't be bothered to keep watch or know how to keep an eye out for suspicious signs, then that was their problem. I spied the less bulging bag and considered reaching for it. That's when a loud bang came from downstairs. Several crashing noises followed, joined by the sound of boots hitting the floor. I quickly retreated to the office. That's when the shouting started, both from downstairs and upstairs. The police kept informing everyone, in the loudest roars possible, that they were, in fact, the police. The robbers began shouting in frantic and panicked voices about how they also realized the police were who they said they were. Although it came out more like, "Oh my God, the cops." My pulse sped up. It didn't matter how much I'd expected this. I forced myself to remain both calm and in place. Shouts of "clear" spread through the building. It didn't take long for the anticipated pops of the smoke grenades to follow. This wasn't the first time I'd seen the police enter a building like this. I put on the mask I'd nicked from the detective's car, making sure to use the extra second I needed to get it on properly. I did not want that suffocating smoke inside the mask. Then I peered through the doorframe and into the corridor again. Smoke was already wafting up from the stairs, spreading fast. I might have spent an extra second to prioritize breathing, but I didn't have any more to spare now. There was a lot of coughing coming from nearby. The robbers understood the need to get out. Apparently, they didn't consider the windows as anything more than a long drop to the ground. If they'd been more into climbing, though, I silently chided them while focusing on my task and trying not to worry about the three armed men heading my way in the smoke. Hopefully, they were aiming for the stairs and not prioritizing their stolen goods anymore. Carefully, while holding my breath, still with my feet in the office, I reached for the correct bag and unzipped it. My purse lay on top of everything else now, where Rudy had tossed it. I took hold of the long strap and then yanked the purse toward me with a triumphant smile behind the mask. "Crap! It's you!" a man yelled between a serious coughing fit. I might have been masked, but my general appearance and build didn't make it a difficult guessing game for the guy. I'd annoyed him enough to be memorable today. His presence wiped the smile right off my face. The man came toward me, a dark figure in the smoke that turned out to be Rudy when I could see him better. Of course, better meant too close. "What are you, oh?" He noticed the purse in my hand and smiled himself, though his smile was transformed into a grimace of pain and discomfort because of the smoke. His partners were shouting while going down the stairs, and so were the police below. There was so much noise. "You're looking for this, huh?" Rudy shouted, tears in his squinting eyes when he withdrew something from his pocket. My eyes widened, free from the pestering smoke. He was holding the gaming chip in his hand. My gaming chip. I couldn't help but glance at the purse in my hand. The evidence of me not having it was right there. Rudy must have taken it out again after the alley. It was worth a hell of a lot of money after all. I sprang forward then, set on getting it back. This was my last chance and I was already on borrowed time. The cops would soon come up here too, and I needed to be gone then. "What?" Rudy coughed out, and then struggled further to breathe. But he wasn't helpless. He simply reached higher and effectively lifted the chip out of my reach. I elbowed him in the ribs then, the part of him closest to me and open for hurt. He woofed and coughed more, but managed a strike against my back before I saw sense and jumped back from his proximity. I knew better than to get too close to opponents that were bigger than me. Speed and distance were my friends. I was already swinging my purse. It was good for something other than containing a valuable gaming chip. I struck his forearm, and he cried out in shock more than anything, dropping his gun on the floor. He hadn't seen me strike his colleagues back in the alley and didn't expect me to use such an innocuous thing for a weapon. Rudy tried righting his stance from the impact, but I was not done. I swung again and hit his face this time. The lead sewn into the bottom of the purse doing its job to perfection. Before the guy could focus on me properly, I leaped forward, crouched low, and kicked the side of his knee. He groaned then, staggering and struggling to remain upright while I rolled away. He grabbed onto the banister by the stairs and then stared back at me. Confusion and anger pulsed from his face. And then he did the worst thing he could do. He raised his hand, still clutching the chip, and simply dropped it over the banister. It vanished into the smoke on the stairs, below to the oncoming cops. "No!" I shouted, though I doubted anyone could hear me in the deafening noise. I ran forward, rage coursing through me, making my heart beat faster than mere adrenaline could. I'd fought so hard for this, not only today, but every day since I became a mender. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the trust bestowed on me, the ease I could have when helping people from now on. And now it tumbled down into a chaos of legalities I could not get caught up in. I punched Rudy in the face and gasped at the pain in my hand. I didn't care, though. The guy slumped over the banister, and I figured he could at least hinder the cops from coming upstairs too fast. I grabbed the guy's feet and heaved. He yelled in fear and squirmed, but not before it was too late. He tumbled over and fell into the smoke. I didn't stay to see what happened to him. Merely heard his cries and thumps of his landing mixed with all the other shouting and chaos. Nothing here had taken more than a couple of minutes. Soon, the cops would be in control. They hadn't fired any shots so far, so I could only assume the robbers were surrendering. I had other plans. I ran back toward the office. The sight of the bags stopped me short. I eyed them both and then made a snap decision. I slung the purse strap over my shoulder and grabbed the biggest bag, the one without valuables the other customers at the cafe would miss, and swung it up and around my back. I used the handles to slide my arms into and carried it like a backpack while sprinting to the window. That is to say, sprinting is a generous word for wobbling. The bag was heavy. I tuned out the noise behind me and climbed outside. With the added weight, one misstep could have me falling to the unforgiving surface below. The muscles in my arms, especially, hurt while I clamped on for dear life, passing by windows that were thankfully covered with smoke now. Otherwise, I would have been seen. I could hardly believe it when I hit the ground on shaky yet functional legs. I ran straight for the corrugated sheet metal and the hole in the fence. I didn't even consider the fence out to the street. There would be cops there keeping a lookout. The bag was too big for the hole. I acted on instinct and desperation at this point. I threw it over the fence and it landed with a thud on the other side. The noise made me shudder. Had someone heard? I didn't stop to see, merely crawled under the sheet metal and wriggled through the hole. I slumped down there with my back to the fence, tore the gas mask off, and tried controlling my breath. I didn't want someone to hear me. I was hidden by the small heap of old tires and the large storage building, but mindful of the fact that Samaras and Lampert's car was still parked out front there. I sat there for 2 minutes before the noise from the office building seemed to die down a bit and the sounds of someone moving around outside on ground level came closer. I held my breath then, my lungs protesting. Someone was on the other side of the fence. Steps sounded, but there was no trampling. Not someone in a hurry. I almost squealed in pent-up agitation when a thundering noise rolled through the fence. I could physically feel it. Someone had lifted and promptly let go of the sheet metal. "Clear!" a man shouted. He couldn't be standing more than 3 or 4 feet from me. I glanced down and saw the hole in the fence was still covered by the metal sheet on the other side. The cop had only yanked and lifted it quickly to eliminate someone hiding underneath. I didn't dare sigh in relief, merely waited until he walked away on the other side of the fence. A few minutes later, I eyed the large bag and pulled it closer so it lay right next to me. Then I settled in to wait. Chapter 6. I stopped midway up the stairs to Orson's office. That was definitely a creak I'd heard. Wasn't it? I stood stock still but heard no more. Get it together, Margaret. This merely looks like a place a serial killer would hang out. I eyed every corner and shadow above and under me, but there was nothing to see. I shook my head and kept walking, hefting the heavy burden of the carry-all bag on my back, the handles chafing my shoulders. My mind was playing tricks on me, and I didn't need more trouble today. I'd waited several hours for the cops to leave with their captured robbers and then some, in case they stuck around the area. After that, I'd taken the bag and slinked away. So far, I hadn't seen any more of Detectives Samaras and Lampert, and they hadn't phoned me either. I'd heard them when they'd called in the possible whereabouts of the robbers. They had only said a witness had alerted them. If they hadn't locked me down by now, that meant they had no interest in naming me as that particular witness. I guessed it had to do with the missing knife and gas mask from their car. That would be embarrassing. "It's all right," I heard Adeline's voice when I reached the landing. "She's here now. I'll see you at home afterward." I reached the half-open door in time to see her kiss Orson goodbye before she came toward me and gave me a smile in passing. "Congratulations, Peggy," she added, and then headed down the stairs. I walked inside Orson's office, noting the sunny smile on his face. So that was how that was. They were a sweet couple, I guessed. Certainly interesting. "I'd say you two would be the police's worst nightmare if you're using your combined abilities for crimes," I told Orson. "Who says we're not?" he joked and got up from the office chair he'd taken a seat on. "The fact that Harriet uses and trusts you? No community appreciated those who were a threat to us all with the risk of exposure." "Oh, that. Well," he waved it off and eyed me. "How was the gym? Nice pants." I rolled my eyes. To avoid further notice, or the wrong kind of notice, by passing cops, I'd bought some gym clothes to make me seem less out of place hauling the big bag around. At the moment, I was wearing a pink halter top and black yoga pants with swirly pink lines on them. I'd swept my shortened hair back into a tiny ponytail and kept my hoodie on. I looked like the peak of annoying health and sportiness, like someone who'd posted all online for everyone to see. Still, outside, I'd looked like someone headed to or from the gym, nothing out of the ordinary, and that was all that mattered to me. "Thank you," I said to Orson's amused remark, owning the bright pink, and then walked over to the table I'd sat at yesterday and put the bag on it. "I see Adeline's alternate vision came to fruition," Orson said and walked over. "Alternate vision?" "Yes. Not everything she sees happens. Often she sees more than one outcome. It's why predicting the future is so difficult. There are lots of different scenarios when considering the future." "You knew I wouldn't come here with the chip?" "Oh, yeah. Harriet thought that a safe bet once Adeline mentioned the possibility of you veering off the path to find something sweet to eat." He took hold of the zipper and opened the bag, removed my discarded jeans, t-shirt, and gas mask, and then whistled when he saw the contents beneath. Lots and lots of small bills stuffed inside. "You knew I might lose the chip?" I repeated, feeling my cheeks redden a bit. Was I that predictable? For sweets? "Yes, that was highly probable. We could have helped you, though, and then you might have gotten the chip back, but you never called." He shrugged like this hadn't been a surprise at all. "I'm not supposed to ask you for help," I told him, feeling my cheeks cool as I got my composure back. "I'm supposed to help you all. And now you can without worrying about angry bosses and being fired." Orson looked up from the money and smiled at me. "This is better than the chip." "Why? Because it's already laundered? At least that's my guess. No dry cleaners keep that much money in their register." "True, but we'll have to do something similar again. This is going to become legit. There are some shifty people on the prowl for this cash, after they were robbed of it earlier today. However, Adeline never saw them connecting the dots to us. So like I said, this is better than the chip. It is? This is six figures too? Oh, sweet mender. He shook his head like I was the most naive person in the world. Try 7. My eyes bugged out a moment. Anyway, Orson went on without noticing, when I'm done with this, you'll be very comfortable indeed, and it will all be above board and tripled plentyfold. You'll never have to worry about money ever again. I eyed the money a second and then grabbed my clothes and the gas mask from the table. Thanks, Orson. I'll leave you to it so you can get back to Adeline quicker. He smiled warmly then. Thanks. And on that note, maybe you should look out for yourself now and then too. How do you mean? You can't spend all your time fending for us on your own. I've met more than one mender in my time. Just live a little. Find someone to live with? I can highly recommend it. He closed the bag up and lifted it off the table and onto the floor. Yeah, I shrugged and headed toward the door. But that's not how the lives of menders work. Thanks for the help with my finances, Orson. Other than that, I don't think I'll ever be as lucky as you. This has been Foresight and Thieves, an Ashport prequel story. Written by G.K. Lund. Copyright 2020 by G.K. Lund. Audiobook production copyright 2025 by G.K. Lund. If you want to be notified of other audiobooks by G.K. Lund, remember to click subscribe. That way you won't miss new additions to this YouTube catalog.